Aloha, everyone. We are all very humbled to be here today to share this space with you and discuss about lessons learned, overall lessons learned from the last 2.5 years. We want to explore what worked, what were some gaps in our systemic response, and how to translate the lived experience that they all have on this panel to better prepare for the next time we need to respond. I want to get right into it and give all the opportunity to spend time listening to these four amazing women's experiences in the last 2.5 years, specifically focusing on the first few weeks, first few months of the response, and really specifically look at food policy and resilience building in our communities moving forward. I think this is going to be really exciting conversation to learn and to really spark some ideas. We're going to have an opportunity with Q&A after. So if you have questions, please write them down on a piece of paper and we'll go after that and turn to the audience. But we're just going to get right into it. So mahalo for being here, all of you. And we're going to start with Brandi. We're going to open this first question up to all four. But we'll go ahead and start with Brandi and then move down the line. We have really so much to be proud of in the last 2.5 years in terms of witnessing our communities being able to come together and really pull through some extremely challenging barriers that were put up on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis, and building on the strength and resilience that's been so evident. I wanted to start by asking Brandi, from your vantage point, what do you think worked best in the very first days of the recovery and the response?
Hello. No, they can hear me. I wanted to speak on relationships. I think that worked really well in the beginning. Because we do this, we have a network of over 120 agencies, and they're distributing food every day. So when this hit, we knew we could count on those agencies to do the work. On top of that, relationships with our food banks across the state, I mean, they showed up for us. I remember the very next day, we showed up to work and there were 6 of us in a room. And this is the operations, that's drivers, the sourcer, the clerk, the logistics, transportation, 6 of us. And we looked at each other and we thought, how are we going to do this? We've got 120 agencies counting on us because they all want to respond. We have a community that has been lost. What do we do? Well, we called our friends across the water and they came to our rescue. Hawaiʻi Food Bank, West on Kauai, and even Kristen and her team, they all supported us. We got on calls. We were there for each other. So I really want to highlight relationships, not just for the actual response, but even for your mental health. They really helped me. Wes talked me off a ledge multiple times. So I want to highlight relationships for students.
And Marco.
I think it's been said multiple times during this conference, but community and community first, community matters. We live on an island and we all showed up for each other. It was our neighbors out there. We had 3 of our staff lost their houses. Everybody was impacted in some way, but everybody showed up because we cared about our community. And I think that's why we're all here today, because we want to move forward and how can we learn from what happened and continue to build those relationships, continue to have those conversations so that we can be better prepared.
Samesies. But I think for us, what really worked is the relationships with the community. And so for us, we work with the people experiencing the most vulnerable situations of their lives at all times. And it was those relationships that we could call on to really understand what was going on, what was needed. Because for us and a lot of us around in the community too, it's about trusting that the people impacted know what they need. And My brain still is remembering all the things that happened the past 2 years. But the number one thing that I remember, and I cry about it at night, is that for about a month, we didn't have to fight to feed people. I'm going to say that again because I have to fight every single day. We did not have to fight to feed people. And that, and also they would tell us what they needed. And that came from those relationships, and they trusted our relationship with the food bank and with other agencies, with Common Ground Collective. And it was like, this circular, maybe an ahupua'a, what it would be in this day and age, but it was all working what I think a lot of us want in that first month, and we were forced into it. I hate saying this, but sometimes I wish we could go back to what that was like, because it wasn't a fight.
For me, I think it was community, but for me, it was a very specific kind of community. So I got the call the morning after the fires, and like, hey, the normal response for feeding is down. We need to feed people today, and hot meals. And I was like, why are you calling me? But it was through the network I had worked with of activists, of the people that are constantly speaking out, the people that are almost shunned a lot of times from the conversations. Those were the folks that activated. Those were the folks that showed up. The farmers came. I think the first week we got probably 30,000 pounds worth of fresh produce just given to us by local farmers, local distributors, Rimfire, VIP, Sunfresh, Local Harvest. They all were just giving us food. They were shipping food to the college so that we could make meals. All the chefs, the first day I called, I was like, well, how am I going to cook that many meals? So we called, the counselor at UHMC, and because I went there, he was like, okay, take the college, but give me a letter, So it was like those kinds of things. I called Madame Donut, and I was like, how many chefs can you get me today? And it was those people that we overlook that really came together to do the work. And it was those chefs that were bringing in supplies from their own restaurants. It was our nonprofit and many others that were draining our bank accounts to pay for the food, to make sure those meals got out. And it was people within the county, not the top officials. It was people within the county that were setting up the shelters, that were sending text messages, because we knew each other for community meetings from things like this. So it was a very specific kind of community. So this right here is creating that kind of community, those networks to do that work in those situations.
I did want to highlight that that first 10 days, like everybody said, it is community that's gonna show up. Like nobody else shows up. You have county, you have state, you have federal agencies, people there because they're staff, but they're not in that capacity. They're there as your neighbor and as your friend. And that is super important anytime if this is gonna happen anywhere, because those 10 days you're on your own and you gotta figure it out. So I think our friendships with each other and connections, like everybody has said, helped us get through that. We knew where somebody had a refrigerated truck. We knew who had a forklift. We knew who had what supplies, and we were able to work together to get that to the right places. And it's still are 2 years later.
I think you all kind of touched on the importance of relationships that were pre-existing. When we think about when we're in these situations where you have to quickly pivot on a daily basis and sometimes on an hourly basis in terms of the need and how that need shifts, especially in situations that's so fluid like this, and really the traumatic stress response of something like this, where we have no idea what's happening next. We have no idea how to predict what the next kind of need is going to be and how severe that might look and how much we need to pivot. I want to turn to Jennifer and kind of start on the end and ask all of you again, coming down the line. When we think about from a systems level, you're talking about a very individualistic level of relationships from one person to the next, from one family to the next, from one neighbor to the next, both in your professional capacity and I'm sure in your personal capacity as well. But when we think about on a systems level, because some of these lessons learned we want to inform policy, what do you think were the major significant gaps? So we want to start off with the strengths. What works? And I think we can all agree that it's key to have those pre-existing relationships and then to be able to develop relationships when you need to. But there were significant gaps. Can each of you speak to your perspective on those during the initial response in terms of coordination? I know we spoke a little bit with Chad, talked a little bit about communication gaps, about logistic challenges, not just geographic challenges, but then overall governance in terms of specific gaps. Can you speak to any of those areas?
There were a lot of gaps, and I think it's because we haven't seen a disaster of that size, and there wasn't, pre-existing plans for feeding. The gaps ranged from no pre-existing contracts, no pre-existing network. There was not a way to get information out to the community because we lost, internet and things like that. So communication, and then for us, a lot of the government was in the EOC, and in Maui County, the EOC is in the basement of the county building. So the you can reach them, but they were making a lot of calls from that basement, and they didn't have the eyes on the community. So there was a lot of gaps there. And then, after the initial 10 days, once government started to integrate into the community efforts, the response wasn't very respectful on how it was integrated. So there wasn't room for the community to continue, and the community didn't want to provide the room to the federal agencies and BOAD to integrate because they were clashing. So there was withholding of information, and then there was also just how the frameworks were set up is, flying in volunteers and those being rotated every 2 to 3 weeks led to a lot of breakdown of communication and gaps in information, which I think is easy fixes for the future, but it's just working on that. The pre-existing contracts or emergency funds that could have immediately been triggered, that didn't exist. That's something that we can definitely work on in the future. And then infrastructure, we're just so lacking in infrastructure, cold storage and refrigerated trucks and commercial kitchens and, places to stay so that, when we're bringing in people, rather than utilizing our own community to, withstand those prolonged efforts, we're taking up more infrastructure that could be used for response efforts as well. So I think those are big gaps. Translation services and accommodations for people were huge. We did not have translators. We didn't have ASL. There was just not a lot of that there. Another thing that we saw was that if people didn't have their papers with them when the disaster happened, or if they were homeless, they were just being denied care. So a lot of people didn't fit into the government response sector, and the government response sector did not have a backup plan for how those people got food or got assistance and things like that. So those were pretty massive gaps. And then just like no inventory systems, and in the initial days, just allowing community efforts to go through and drop off supplies and things. We had people almost get arrested, and kind of had to have really tough conversations about like, hey, this is supplies. But because there was not a lot of communication between government and community, there was a lot of conflict that arose that didn't need to. So I'd say those were the biggest gaps.
Nicole. I'm going to personalize some of what Jennifer just said because still to this day, this morning, I was on my phone all morning trying to find a home for a tutu and her 3 grandchildren that are being kicked out of FEMA for paying their rent late. They paid it in full. I talked to, I don't think he's here anymore, but the guy from the Office of Recovery. I've texted all of the county, and there's still no answer to those folks that are housed in places that will all be up on February 10th. And so there's a breakdown in communication, and then there's a breakdown in recognizing those of us that are at the end of the line. My nonprofit is at the end of the line. We're harm reduction. And every week we ask ourselves, is the harm done? Is the harm that is there done? And if we say yes, we move on to a new project. We move on to the next harm. We don't stick with programs so that it kind of keeps things going. We move on. And we haven't been able to move on from things like that. And so, because we have no control in that, what we have focused on is feeding people. And then we also are getting straight cash. Like we were able to get in because we work with the homeless, and the police chief called us, and my team was on the ground with the police doing bottle recovery. And so that allowed us also to get supplies in. And yeah, sorry, I'm still processing all of this. I mean, I'm still processing, but what we're finding is when we give people the ability, so right now we're giving out money to people that's $700 a month for a year. And on the back end of that, we can see what they're purchasing. They're purchasing from Walmart and Costco. Of the $90,000 we gave out in 6 months, more than half, about 65%, is spent on food. On food. And all of these people in our program were deemed non-fire survivors, even though they absolutely are fire survivors. You can't deny if you're from Lahaina or not. Everybody knows everybody. And so we're still fighting. I'm still fighting. I've still got my armor on. You can clearly see that, right? So I wish that we didn't have to do that.
I think that video was a little triggering for us, so it's hard to think about what you really want to say. So Jenna is very capable. I think she said no to the gap, so good for her. I did want to speak to a couple of those examples that she had mentioned. Definitely the pre-contracting. Like Jen said, farmers showed up in force. We were all farmers. We're farmers. We're a farming nonprofit. We showed up with all our friends. We're unloading containers of salmon and Spam and Vienna sausage, and we're eating that because we don't have time to eat and feed ourselves. But we're all farmers, and we're like, what are we doing? We have to feed our people like our food. And everybody's donating their food, and we're telling you, no, like, we have to figure this out because you're donating your profit. You spent a year to grow cattle, and then you're just giving it away because we take care of our people, but that means the next year you can't feed your family. So pre-contracting, to me, is the key to be able to say, no, we're going to set up these pre-contracts. When something happens, we're buying 20,000 pounds of kalo from you. We're buying luauhi from you. We're buying poi from you, so that we can feed our people our food, and you are what you eat, and we need to be back eating our own food. But then that doesn't make a second fire survivor. We're denying that this person was not a fire survivor because they didn't live in a specific house that burnt down, but they were affected in all these different ways. So I think that was a big gap, that we need to have pre-contracts for food, but for everything else too. And then the other thing I wanted to speak to was all the volunteers pouring in. There was so much aloha, but we didn't have a system like Janet talked about for managing those volunteers, People came in, they said, I'm a logistics operator. I know what to do, this, and this, and this. And they're telling us what to do. And we're like, you're not even from here. How do you even know who has the skid steer and who has a truck and who has this? So we have to take that upon ourselves. And we did. He created a resiliency hui that we're all a part of and said, we're going to be the ones that are managing you. You come in and you say, how can I help? Not tell you what to do. So just be on the lookout for when that happens. You have to turn that narrative around and say, here's how you can help me, because I know and I have it written down and I have it already managed, and you can go here because this is your niche, and here you can go and cook in the kitchen, or you can do this or this, but find what they can bring to the table and then you funnel them to the right organization. I'm going to mention something that more around operations. Capacity was a huge gap, not just for our organization, but even our agencies. Jen mentioned no cold storage, if that's real. And so many families wanted fresh food and they couldn't get it. So capacity was huge. It's huge for us. We had combined about 15,000 square feet of warehouse space. But with the donations coming in and the food that was needed, we needed 10 times that amount. And you guys saw those pictures from Mr. Chad Buck of Lowe's. That was over 60,000 square feet of space that was completely filled. And it was a rotating door. Then there was the Safeway, and then Hawaii Food Bank had to get an extra space just for us because there was so many donations coming in from California and other food banks and Feeding America. They were kind of holding back this wall for our tiny team of 6 to even process. So capacity was huge. And mind you, you have no loading dock. So if you work in logistics, you know how important even just a simple loading dock is. And we were doing about 12 containers a year prior to this fire. So when you're doing 8 containers in a week, thank you, Terry, it was a lot for 6 people. You had staff working round the clock, people skipping their wives' birthdays. We even have a staff member that, he had a death in his family and he took off maybe 2 days, but he felt such a compelling need to be where we were at for the entire community. And so capacity is huge. And if there's anything we can do now is start thinking about that. Like, buy one of those freeze-dried machines now, or get your dock, get a facility, get things that you need.
Thank you for those thoughtful kind of responses. And I'll just kind of build a little bit off of what Makaleʻa said. I think that's the first time I've seen any video footage for the last 2.5 years. I specifically did not watch anything from the day that my office got deployed till today. I never watched anything on social media. I never watched the news when it came to video. I turned the channel. And I think no matter how well prepared, even in the best case scenario, with every best practice put in place, and every manual put in practice, that was an absolutely overwhelming response. The need and the timing is so immediate of a need, with such a huge community being impacted, not just on West Maui, but as we all know, on every part of Maui, up country, of course, and then across the entire state. The response was not just overwhelming in terms of the aloha that came through, but the need was even more. And I hear what you're saying, because this morning I was on the phone about an issue around the February date with FEMA as well, with survivors, and it's like trying to catch your breath and then realizing, oh, the next minute comes something else. So I wanted to kind of, I know nobody gets through this standing alone. And you guys all mentioned the concept of relationships. But I also think that when we're looking at this type of community leadership that each of you have really displayed over the last 2.5 years, the amount of leadership that you've taken on, even if you didn't ask for it, I think this is not not done by yourself with your own strength. It's the strength that you have, not only from those around you, but those who you can see. And so I want to really kind of take a moment to think about, and specifically for Nicole and Makaleʻa, I wasn't asked this questions about how do you think that community leadership and cultural knowledge play a role in the response of this event? And we all really know that trust is essential when it comes to how people engage, especially when we're in traumatic response. We go into typically fight, flight, or freeze response when we're overwhelmed with stress. And because of that, engaging people can be very challenging. Being able to gather personal information can be a huge barrier. But trust is obviously essential to take the first step to ask for help. And I think even more to accept help, and possibly even to know what help you even need. And so when it means sharing private information or having to prove need, I wanted to specifically pose the question around how you feel part of the success of the response was due to the relationships. But I'm curious on the community networks that were mobilized faster than the formal institutions. How do you feel like trust and cultural knowledge and indigenous knowledge shaped your response?
So I guess going to speaking about trauma and the state everybody was in right after, like a second felt like an hour felt like a day felt like a week, and a week felt like a month. Like it was happening so fast. And Mr. Buck said, your what it's like your body is in this like stress mode. And so everything is, you have to be really careful about what you do, how you speak, how you treat yourself, and you treat volunteers. Like it's a very delicate situation. So I think first, really getting training on trauma informed response. That's number one. Let's all be prepared. But I think for us, like in our hub, when we started, it was about treating people with humility, compassion, humanity, just being Hawaiian, and not when people came through the door, we didn't say, "Oh, where's your ID? Did you sign up? Where'd you live? Is this your real ID?" Or like people were having fake IDs, but we didn't. That wasn't us. You came to our door, and we said, "What's your first name?" And they're like, "Oh, don't you want our ID?" I don't care. Like if you signed up, you came through my door, and you found out about us somehow. What's your first name? And so from then on, we have 500 families that come through our door every single week, and we know everybody's first name. And I think that was the beginning of getting to know them and their story. Oh, hi, Auntie. Blah, blah, blah. Just talk story. And then being able to let down their guard, let down that, like, just feel a little bit more comfortable and being able to just coming to our door to ask for food was hard. Like on our application or on our intake form, it said, "Are you filling this out for yourself or somebody else?" Because it was so hard for people to come in for themselves. We had to get people to nominate families and say, and I called them up specifically or emailed them and I said, "You have been nominated by your family to receive this free basket of poi and food every single week. So come in here and get it." Because people didn't want to. They just said, no, I'm fine. Like this should go to another family. So just having those personal relationships to really start to get to talk to them, get to know their stories. And now, like, I have babies coming in for like one papaya. I'm like, take more. Like, we have all of this good food. They're like, "No, I'm good. My refrigerator's full, but I just want to come and chat and talk story." So yeah, just to be able to create that space, the resilience hubs are like based on trust and relationships. And then you can help them heal in other ways. Then you can point them to other resources that they need. Hear their story and be like, "Oh, wait, I know Nicole. You can go get a bed or whatever." But to be able to learn what they need in non-clinical hack things and just treat people like human beings.
Saying things again. um, very very similar experience to, I think, a different group of people. Like for us, we focused on the people experiencing the most vulnerabilities. And that led one of our people in our hui to start Ice Cream Aunties. And we literally got a truck, turned on ice cream music, and just started driving around Lahaina with ice cream. And that team is still going, and there are still kupuna that will only answer their door in Leali'i for ice cream aunties. That's it. And we take that like as a deep responsibility. When we know there's kupuna, we know that there's single moms like so shame that they have to ask for help over and over again. Like I think everybody can kind of get it up, like they can get it, they can build it up to ask once, but when you're in such a deep hole and you have to ask over and over again, and that really motivated us to build free stands and install community fridges. We're working right now with the emergency room nurses who asked us to install a fridge outside of the hospital because so many people are just sitting there waiting or whatever. So we really took what was in front of us, and I think tried to design systems for what the people maybe they weren't saying, because that's also another part of being trauma informed. For me, one of the ways you build trust is when you can sit through anger together. And I think our systems, Jennifer was talking about it, like sometimes our government systems are built for right down the middle, and they can't hear the people that are really silent, and then they can't hear the people that are really angry. And that's, if you can access those what those people are experiencing, you can build trust. And then the next time they're angry, you actually get to interpret that for them and sit next to them and help them with their disaster case manager or state or county official. And I think that's really what it is to just show up with people and knowing and really trusting to know what they need.
I love that. I want to quote you on that, because that is something that is one of the best things I've heard in how you meet people where they are. Mm-hmm. And that concept of having a safe kind of space for somebody to be and sit with them in kind of such an intense emotion like anger, where you might even feel so helpless. And when you're a helper and you're in the helping field, the first thing you want to do is help find the solution. But just to be able to sit in an emotion like anger and just connect with somebody without any answer to make it better, that is one of the deepest human connections that we can make. So what an amazing gift to be able to do that. And as being in the field of where you folks are as helpers, as first responders, you might not think of yourself as first responders. You might not think of yourself as being a helper, but it's exactly what you have been in the last 2.5 years.
There. I'm realizing that I'm at a food safety conference. 2 weeks ago, I was at a homeless conference. If you look at systems like food stamps, anybody can look up right now how much of that budget is paid out to prevent fraud. Depends on the administration, but sometimes it's up to 60% of their budget. I don't know. You might know how much in like when grocery stores or just anybody in the food industry, they design for 5 to 10% of loss of product, right? I don't know if you don't know. And I think for me, that's what we're trying to do is like design for 5 to 10% of mistrust because of trauma. Then just assume everybody is being fraudulent or taking more than they need. And I think if you show up that way, if you show up with people and centering wherever they are at, no matter if they're really angry or they're really distraught, or I think I've learned fawning as a trauma response, people pleasing as a major trauma response. I've learned that a lot in this disaster, is that we can design systems to trust people. And it will be okay. We'll actually probably be better off. Yeah, absolutely.
As we start to kind of consider how we prepare ourselves, our families, our organizations, our neighbors to take these lessons learned and to hopefully turn them into, policy, a space we might not feel so empowered and comfortable in stepping in as a community-based organizations doing that groundwork on a daily basis. But we know these experiences are critical to shape the future that we want to see. And we want to make sure that people who have lived experience and now expertise in this area that went through the groundwork, like all of you did on Maui, we want to systematically gather this information to be able to help inform us how to move forward collectively and learn from what works here and how it can be translated to policy, how it can be translated to resources. So I want to check in with Brandi and Jennifer, and if Nicole or Makaleʻa have ideas, please jump in. But what specific policy or investment priorities could help build a more resilient, locally rooted food system before the next disaster?
I would say any policy that supports farmers to do their job. Just last month, we lost a sweet potato farmer because they could no longer pay the lease for their land. So they went to the Big Island to move their operations. And I thought it's so unfortunate because it's not just their story. There's so many farmers that can't afford to farm because the lease is so high. Then there's water, then there's staffing. I mean, there's so many barriers for a farmer to do what they're passionate about, and their hearts come by now. So, I don't have a specific idea for a policy, but I'll leave that up to our policymakers. But I would influence them to think about our farms.
Buying it a lot. So, I just want to echo that the emergency feeding task group that we did, this was a bunch of organizations, community groups, and people that came together. So we have all these recommendations in the emergency feeding task force report, but just to echo them here, making sure that we have local procurement is mandated in emergency response is so crucial because the work that we were doing is I basically made well-sent pigeon purchase locally. We work specifically to purchase as much local as possible because what you don't think about in these events is with the loss of all that tourism and all that market, that's market connections loss for all of our farmers. So if we're talking about resiliency, purchasing local is mandatory unless you want a food system collapse locally. So that's a huge, huge, huge one. So I really urge all of you guys to really push for any of your policymakers to mandate local purchasing in any state and county contracts. The other one is pre-existing contracts. We need it for infrastructure, shipping, trucking. We need it for hot meals. We need it for food boxes. We need it for all of these things existing. And we're suggesting that you have primary, secondary, and tertiary, right? Because in the disasters, we're seeing that if your primary is impacted and you have nobody else to go to, your system falls apart. Or it's too big and it's too overwhelming for one agency. You need secondary and tertiary responders contracted as well. So along with those contracts, having emergency funds that already have triggers in place, so those can just be direct deposited so that our responders are not having to grant write and fundraise while they're doing emergency response because it leads to enormous frustration and burnout. Another one is we need continuing education in our government just as much as we need it in our nonprofits. We have to continue education within our government. A lot of times when we go into our government and folks don't have degrees, they're not doing continuing education, they're not trauma informed, they're not looking at new studies about mental health or health and wellness. It's so crucial. We need to start mandating continuing education. hairdressers need continuing education requirements. There's no reason that our government doesn't need them. Increasing SNAP and DSNAP flexibility and adjustments for benefits for FEMA and everything. Our cost of living in Hawaii is so much different than other places. It's so expensive. So we need to adjust those costs to reflect how much it costs to live here. And also sizes of families and the makeup of families too. It's different here. So we need to have that. And then also policy for data. We need consistent data points that people are tracking. We need to have protections in place for that data. And then I would really love to go a step further and building out data that can also link referrals to mental health and housing and transportation. Food is such a crucial touch point. If you look at any culture across the globe, the way you have relationships with people is you break bread. So the first thing that people seek out is where are we going to feed ourselves? Where do we get food and water? And so those touch points are so important to start building out referrals to the other sectors. And so I'm really so grateful for this group for putting this on, because we set the stage for all the other sectors in response. And it's so important. So those are just a few, but yeah, please read the report.
It's actually great. I really thank you for spearheading it. I'm gonna add 2 to that if I remember though. That link in with that. Right now, Maui is we have 53% of our population is ALIS or below. For me, in my day-to-day, that is just as much of an emergency as the fire. And we don't have the structure to respond as if it is. And that we can't keep up with food and the Vienna sausages. Like, I wish we could do produce, but we can't even keep up with canned food with the amount of like meals people need right now. And I think actually just to back up some data. So that was one thing that I learned too, is gather that data. And then I chose not to give it away because it was the only PowerPoint and Power Play I had. And one of those pieces of data is with our pilot project with our Universal Basic Income program. We gave $700, like I said before, $700 a month for 6 months. And almost everybody spent that on food. Their response when we asked them how their lives changed was not that they were still hungry, but 75% of those people said that their mental health was significantly better just by buying their own food and having that agency. That, I think, having the ability to actually analyze some data like that will help us have cross-sector responses. So it's not just this silo of food. It can actually be mental health and food policy. And I think that really is, for me, where we have to go next. Because mental health is a major thing that kind of coexists with food security.
Really, really quick. But if we're talking about specific policies that we can support in the legislation, about 5 years ago, me and Lala were in the county and we supported a taro tax incentive bill that helps to anybody in any food system or any growing taro, value-added products, whatever. The state would give you a taro tax incentive and incentivize that you grew that, and you didn't have to claim that $100,000. But I was in the plane this morning and I was reading Hanaho magazine, and it had a write-up of Chief of War, and in there he said, how do you change the film industry today? And he cited exactly where we were citing to put this taro tax incentive was with the film industry. And he said, this is why our film industry is tanked, because this tax incentive isn't big enough. And I'm like, we need to do this for our people, our taro farmers, and anybody who produces anything. We had it written up already. It was on the governor's desk, and he vetoed it, Governor Ige. So we got to get it back on there and support it and pass that again.
I want to pivot for the last couple of minutes from the system level reflection and kind of thinking on the larger scope of the last 2.5 years, and go a little bit into your own experiences. I'm going to just ask each of you to share a quick few words. One of the things that we've learned over the last 2.5 years of this recovery was the importance of what I've learned is the importance of human capacity. When I'm getting close to my capacity of needing to tap out, both personally and professionally, how this worked in the mental health response and recovery coordination on Maui has been, overwhelming to the point of losing hair, gaining weight, losing weight, and it's this idea, of how do we at any given time understand our own signs personally to know when we're not as effective and we're at full capacity. We focused a lot of time in my office, in the Office of Wellness and Resilience, on worker well-being and helping the helpers during the mental health response, and creating a space to really come together on a daily basis to debrief what they just heard, what those stories look like, how that impacts their own ability to provide mental health support, and being able to go to the next person, the next day, the next hour, and do the same amount of compassion and support. I know each of you have been essential during the crisis, and as well as, what we might consider blue sky moments someday, because it doesn't feel like we're in blue sky times right now. But when we have a workforce that's overwhelmed, exhausted, and ill-resourced, everything can come to a halt. So I'd love to hear, in a few words from each of you, how has this experience been for you as a helper, and considering yourself as a first responder? And what did you have to do? What have you had to do that has worked well for your own wellness?
The Red Cross helped fund Catholic charities to do like a mental health therapist would come and talk. They would do mindful exercises with staff, and that's something Maui Food Bank took advantage of for their staff as well. But it was open to everyone that volunteered or was operating a distribution hub or did something for families that were affected. So as our food bank, we did that for staff. Not only that, but EAP, which we were able to stand up because of our friends at the food bank Hui's. But that's extremely important. And I'm just going to share a really quick story. I know it's just a few words. I walked into our clerk's office and she was crying. This was just the first week of the fire. And I'm like, what's going on? And she said, I feel so bad. I just told this lady she can't come in here without shoes. And of course, it's a warehouse, you want to have shoes. And she said, my shoes burned. I ran straight here and I don't know where to get help. So our clerk helped her. Of course, we totally switched the mindset and she was on her way. But I think that with staff, they're holding that and they're just putting on the brave face. And they're doing the job every day, and it's not until they go home or on the way home. And even for my own, like having someone to talk to and work through them, and it's okay to do it and say, I am feeling overwhelmed, and get the help you need.
I think a few words are grace, sleep, and reciprocity. Most of those are self-explanatory, but reciprocity, and like when we check people in, it's by their first names, you get to know them, and then they get to know you, and then they're actually sometimes helping you with your own problems. So being open to reciprocity and feedback and being healed yourself, because it's hard to seek healing and be open to that.
That's beautiful. I can say that I am probably the most burnt out than I ever have been. And I've been in nonprofit since I was 19. And I think for our staff, we made sure every single person had access to a therapist, and we actually helped them date therapists so that they could find the right one. We actually formed a fiscal sponsor so that some of us could partner even deeper. And so we partner with Maui medics, and they come and support us in that way. And And then we just have a really, really flexible work environment. And I think when one of our team, actually the team that went out with the police to identify bodies, they just got back from a 6-week, just totally off vacation. And we like paid that, it's no PTO. There's no PTO on our team. We're all going to be doing this anyways. And in fact, most of the people on our team were doing it and just like receiving services too. So it's like recognizing that as well.
And she's going to Costa Rica tomorrow.
Right. Actually, everybody on my team said if you don't go next, we're not going to take our, and then we're all going to be a really like grouchy team. But I am really proud. We have 100% retention rate. And also with that, like what I include in that though is that people were choose just like we do with the people we serve. We really help people make the best choices for them. So if one person is really struggling financially and they needed a better paying job so that they could stay in their house, and we found them a much better paying job, and they're like rocking it right now. But everybody else, like we're all, I think, same with you, like receiving and reciprocity is a huge deal. Yeah. Jennifer.
I'm terrible with mental health. So I think for me, one thing is that keeps you in this work too is relating. So I think a lot of us that work in these sectors come from trauma, whether that's child or adult. We've experienced a lot of trauma, so our threshold for what we can handle seems so much higher because we can disassociate, right? So during this process and with all the FEMA and the housing, I actually have moved out of Hawaii. I couldn't afford to live in Hawaii anymore. And so it's so frustrating because you're doing this work and you're like, man, I can't even afford to live here. And the people I know can't afford to eat. And I'm supposed to go get a massage, but there's 90 million things to do, or somebody wants to sit and have a conversation with me. And so maybe this will resonate with the folks that are like me that really have never put a lot of energy into that mental health space, is that I read a book called The Art Joy, and it talks about when you are at your capacity mentally and you just feel so alone, you have to remember how many people are going through those things with you. And you're not alone, even though you feel alone. There's been so many people that have had to move out of Hawaii. There's so many people that can't afford their next meal. And you keep working and you keep moving on and putting one foot in front of the other for yourself and for them and for everything. So it's maybe not the best way to do it, but it is a way. And I think it allows us to really connect with our humanity and with our neighbors and with our family and everybody else that's going through really hard stuff every day. Because this work is full of trauma, and it's full of people that have already experienced lifetimes of trauma. So a lot of those times, those folks, they haven't had the tools to come from like a privileged life where you know how to take time off, or when you feel yourself getting burnt out, to step away. So for those folks, it's your mental health is important. You might approach it the same way, but don't feel bad about that. If you get angry, that's part of it. You're allowed to get angry. You're allowed to get sad, tired, frustrated. All that it is mental health care. So just being kind of yourself in that manner too.
I love that you all kind of, again, touched on that concept of like grace, being graceful to yourself, and that your staff are calling you and saying, if you don't do this, neither are we. So the importance of being that kind of a leader in that space from a community organizing perspective is, it's got to start with us in that sense, and be able to do that. But give us the grace to ourselves. I don't know how many times I'm sure each of you have said, today I just did not do enough. And that is, I think anybody who's been involved in the response that kind of thought of, I'm not doing enough, is how do we give ourselves that grace to be able to say, I did everything I could to do, and tomorrow I'll try again. Just for our closing, I know we're a little bit over, but I just want to touch on the last and close this out with the concept of hope. We talk about, our ability to integrate hope into our systems and really think about what that looks like on a systems change level. And one of my mentors, Auntie Pono, just often spoke about building the communities and doing so, and deeply believed in doing so through cultivating hope in people. I would love it if each of you could end by just sharing, if you can, one or two words that gives you hope to get up every day and continue to do this heart work, this soul work of serving people that don't have a voice, that don't have the amount of energy and ability that it takes sometimes to continue on. So how and what is one or two words that gives you hope in doing this, and how can and thinking about how we can continue to build hope collectively before we have to do this again?
I'll let someone else start because I'm trying to think of my two words. I'll start. My hope for the future and looking forward is Auntie Tammy's Emory. We're gonna do that on Maui. We're gonna do all the resilience humps, train everybody. Love it.
I'm there for that. I can't wait for that day. I can't wait for the taste test on Maui. My hope, actually, it's not two words. Sorry, that's not in my personality. Is my most recent hope is Auntie Jolene, who ran barefoot from the fire. She was on Shaw Street. She was homeless at the time, and she currently resides in Kapu'alu, which is also known as Cut Mountain. And she took it upon herself to physically carry, not with a car, 52 loads of trash to the Olo'o station. And then that trash pile she turned into a garden. And that garden is now feeding that entire homeless encampment. And Auntie Jolene's, like, when she talks about what's happened in the last 6 months, like, people used to like try to fight her. It was just a rough place. A lot of people didn't know her name, and now they're all connected through this garden. And this other woman, I won't say her name, who has been on the streets a very, 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 very long time. And her children are on the streets, and they've almost been on the streets their entire lives. And they talk about seeing Auntie Jolene growing strawberries in Lahaina, grapes and strawberries in Lahaina. And that's like, this woman was like, I'm going to rehab this. Strawberries can grow in Lahaina, then I'm going to rehab. And she has. And she is totally different. I didn't even recognize her when I saw her last week. And her whole family, one of her sons got housed. It's just beautiful when you slow down to see those stories instead of making people wrong.
This conference every year gives me a lot of hope. Just learning about all of the folks that are doing amazing stuff throughout the islands. So network, community are probably the two words for me.
I'm going to go with aloha and community. I think what inspires me every day is seeing everyone here serve their community beyond what they thought that they could do. And that gives me hope every day. Seeing this freeze dryer and hearing stories from community, that gives me hope.
Wow. Thank you. I so take a moment to mahalo these four women for their compassion, dedication to their community, to our community, for not only the last 2.5 years, but within your entire career. Thank you for that heartfelt your responses. Thank you for agreeing to be on this panel. Thank you for having this, Alice and team. Thank you for allowing me to be a small little part of it. But please mahalo these 4 women for taking the courage to get up and talk about a very difficult reflection time that we've been doing the last hour. So thank you so much.